Hi everyone and welcome. My name's Frances and I'm Deputy Director at Compass, and welcome to the fourth event in our series of Build Back Better events. So we've talked globalisation on Thursday, we talked the big ideas of how we're rebalancing our time and the economy on Tuesday, and yesterday we talked through rapid transition, how. Today, we're focusing much closer to home, and we're thinking about how we connect up with our local communities. We've got three great speakers tonight, but actually we may only have two great and one rapidly put together at the last minute, but also hopefully passable. And that person is me, because unfortunately Hilary Cottam is unwell and she sent her apologies. She really wanted to be here tonight, but just a couple of hours ago, she just said that she's really not well and not able to make it. So apologies for any Hilary Cottam fans, and I know there are many amongst you who came to specifically hear her. But standing in for her is the much less adequate me, but I will be talking a bit about food insecurity in Walworth, where I live, and the community's response there, which is set up a food hub, which I've been involved in. So if that's something that you're interested in, please stick around and please join my breakout group. A little plug for my breakout group at the beginning. But we do have two fantastic as-build speakers. So we have Councillor Darren Rodwell, who's the leader of London Borough of Barking and Dagenham. And we have Sotez Chowdhury, who's Campaigning Communities Manager at Amnesty International and was previously Head of Community Organising at Labour Party. So we'll be hearing amazing stories and anecdotes and tips and tricks from both of them about how we connect up our community. Just to run through a little bit of housekeeping. So as many of you will know who've joined Zoom meetings before, you can mute and unmute yourself. Please keep yourself on mute for now. And if we ask you to unmute yourself, for example, during the breakout groups, you can find that button at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Mine moved around. On the right-hand side, you should see a chat box, and you can use that to write comments in the chat, to questions to the speakers, and if you're having any technical difficulties, do just put a little message in the chat and we'll see if we can fix that for you. The format for tonight will be that we're going to hear from Darren, Sotez and myself in that order, and then we will do breakout rooms. So all of you should have received a little invite at the beginning of this before tonight's session to indicate which breakout group you'd like to join. Don't worry, there'll still be a chance to move breakout groups or select a new breakout group, especially since Hilary can't join us tonight. And I'll explain a bit about how breakout groups are going to work after the pitches. Once we've done breakout groups, and there's really a chance for you to ask more questions of the speakers, to speak to each other, to share stories, we'll come back and we'll have a final little pitch from all of the speakers about what we can do next to take forward some of the ideas you've heard and how you can get involved with some of the projects they've mentioned come up. So the final thing for me to say is this conversation, in case you hadn't guessed, is being recorded and will hopefully go out along with our podcasts and other events, so other people who can't make the call tonight can listen back and enjoy the conversation too. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our first speaker, who is Councillor Darren Rodwell. So Darren is very well known to Compass because we've been working with the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham for some time now, especially focusing on these questions of how we connect up the community. And as many of you will know, Barking and Dagenham is a leader in innovating around ideas of community connection with the council and in what we like to call 45 degrees politics, which is that meeting point between local, state and the community. So he's here tonight to tell us also specifically about, over the last few months, what the council has been doing to connect up with citizens and how citizens have been linking up and connecting up with each other to offer support and solidarity through the COVID crisis. So welcome, Darren. Your 9 minutes starts now.
Thank you very much. I hope you can understand me. I only speak Dagenham, so it's a dialect which is very simple and very direct. And that's what we do in Barking and Dagenham. We like things simple and direct. We like to make sure that people are supported. What we say is what we do. In fact, it's in our DNA. It's even in our Latin when it comes to the line about the borough. In God, we judge by our deeds. What that means is don't waffle, just get on with the work. So what did we look at when we were fighting the BNP? And I don't know what parties you're from, but I doubt any from the BNP will be on this call tonight. But we learned a lot from that whole issue of basically letting down our community. We knocked 163,000 doors. We spoke to over 65,000 people running up to 210 elections. And we very much learnt there was an aspiration that wasn't being connected to by the local authority and for us, the Labour Party as well. So we listened, we apologised, and we listened a bit more. And with that, we saw that in what we call the borough's ambition triangle, it started with the resident at the top of that triangle, wanting to say how ambitious they were for themselves, their family network, and their community. And it was how we could help them with their vision. We then duly changed the way the council would operate, and we very much have rebuilt, we call it the new kind of council now, because everything we do is either done in-house or through a wholly owned company. We have more in-house and wholly owned company services than anywhere else, we believe, in the UK. But it was all about finding the right partners to invest in that vision as well. And that's what we call the ambition triangle. And in that conversation, what we really wanted to do was empower and take the community leadership and develop it in a way that would stop the parent type attitude that had been in the past here in Barking and Dagenham. So Ford's was your dad. It used to give you your pocket money, and the authority was the mum. We used to wipe your backside. That's how it was. So we wanted to change that and say we need a new true partnership. And that was led by the action teams, which were the councillors of every respective ward in the first instance. But it wasn't led in the respect that we wanted just to say, come along with us, behind us. It was actually saying, how do we facilitate your ambition? And that brought together BD CAN. And that's the Barking and Dagenham Citizens Alliance Network. That's its full title if we do that. So apologies if I just go CAN, because CAN stands for that whole thing. When we got into the council, it was clear the council was still operating in ways that probably were around in, I don't know, the 70s, 80s. A lot of councils had sort of moved on by the 90s, but not in Barking and Dagenham. So we did have to rebuild from the bottom up on how we would work with the community. And we did that for a borough manifesto. On top of all the conversations we'd had before the elections, we then had a conversation just to check with the community that we've got it right in their aspiration. And we had a further 3,000 consultation on a document called the Borough Manifesto. We also realised that you split the operation of the council into two parts. One is about people and the other is about place. Because to try and keep them together actually gets very confusing. So we now have a holistic approach around people, the family unit, and we've brought 16 different services of the council into one location. So we don't actually have a housing department like traditional councils do, because they're already linked into this whole idea of the community's solution to the problem. And we use the voluntary sector as an equal partner. So not everything will be done by the local authority. We will use the expertise of the third sector as well. We also work with different organisations in the first sector, and one of them you may have heard of is Participatory City, which is again a tool of empowering people to give them the ability to believe that actually they're able to achieve what they set out to achieve. And in Community Solutions, we have two elements of that. The first part is how we help our most vulnerable to get them to the place where they're actually starting to become aspirational. And then for the people that are in the aspirational space, we try and help develop where they can come and support the wider community. So we talk about aspiration, supporting the vulnerable in a way that is actually done in a direct but equal measure, in the respect that we want people to feel they're not better than other people, but actually they need to work alongside other people. That then brought us into the Good Neighbour Guide, because actually with all communities there are values, and it's really important, if you want to keep the politics out of debate, you talk about our collective values. So if I go back to the war, it was very clear after the war, it didn't matter where you was in the political spectrum, everyone felt we needed to build a lot of homes. Everyone felt that everyone deserved the right to good education. Everyone felt the right that actually our most vulnerable needed to be supported with funding through social benefits. And then lastly, everyone had the right to good healthcare, and the NHS was formed. And that's what we were trying to bring back through the whole idea of developing a network that works for every citizen, because every citizen has a voice. Every citizen has the right to agree or disagree, but they more importantly have the right to input and be listened to. And that was really, really important. From the Good Neighbour Guide, we then developed a new network. Most places have a CVS. We decided to go out and actually have what we call BD Collective. And that is probably about the 8 biggest voluntary sector organisations working as a collective, as a network. So we've linked into the Faith Network now, we've linked into the Food Network, we've got a whole raft of different networks which actually give you a 360 approach on everything that you're trying to do and support in the community. And I want to give you the example of this, and later on I know we'll be talking about what's in the future. But if you can imagine Star Wars, and you started with 4, 5 and 6 back in '77, we did something similar with BD Can, because actually this is all about the individual. But because of COVID, we actually had to start with organisations. So faith sector, voluntary sector, community sector. We got 85 different organisations working on what we call BD Can Plus. So they were their own institutions in their own right, but they worked as a network, supporting residents in their homes for whatever was needed at the lowest tier of support. So people needing prescriptions, needed food parcels, so on and so forth. And I know the documents there. But what I was really proud about was we were waiting for the shield from government, and the NHS did a fantastic job. But by the time we had got the 1,500 names, we'd already spoken to 11,000 most vulnerable people in the borough. At the same time, and we'd done that collectively as a network, at the same time, we also then provided the support to 30,000 families, individuals across the borough. And that was really important. And that really helped us deliver the outcomes we needed to keep the virus at bay. And we bucked the trend, and we still do even now in East and North East London. We have the lowest confirmed cases, and thank God the lowest confirmed deaths, and none of us want to see any deaths anywhere. So we carry on with that approach, and it's really important. The second part, as I said before, it's about people. We've got that element with the can, and then it's about the place, and that's where the council has a role to make sure that all of what is the asset, the community asset, which is the place, is supported, monitored, and again worked in the best way that supports the individual, the person, the citizen. So that's in a nutshell what BD Can is about. If you want to find out more about how thinking around this, we have a website called neweastnewthinking.com, and on there it talks about the whole BD Can approach with the whole approach of New East New Thinking, and some other bits and pieces we've been talking about as well. But I think I've just hit my time.
Bang on. Thank you, Darren. That's brilliant. Yeah, and I think what really impressed me when I've heard you talk about this before, and some of your colleagues as well, was this question of how in a crisis as well you can continue that approach of collaboration. Because I think what's tempting in a crisis is for local authorities to take control, and in fact you do need them to offer some leadership. You know, in a crisis the local state does perform a really important legitimate role in terms of coordination, avoiding duplication, providing resources. But what's been so impressive to see in Barking and Dagenham is that this goes hand in hand with those relationships and that alliance building that you'd already laid the foundations for. So come a crisis, in fact, that doesn't get thrown out the window. In fact, it amplifies and deepens the responses that council are bringing. And that shows a different kind of leadership, right? I mean, leadership is not just about leading from the front. It is about offering direction and taking responsibility, but it's also about saying we can't do this by ourselves. And as you said, you know, really powerfully, I think this question of the role of civil society and that as this layer in between, and as communities supporting each other, peer-to-peer support, neighbourhoods stepping up, the council has to be part of that mix and understand that mix in order to play its own role and have, as it were, its own USP within that. And I just wanted to ask one follow-up question, which is really, you know, what do you think that you've taken on over this whole crisis and the maybe new approach and new ways of doing things, something that will continue in, say, maybe normaler times, whatever people might conceive of that. I mean, we don't know where we're going with this, but certainly some of the responses of local councillors have been really to respond to the crisis in real time, and that is throwing a lot of energy and resources at it. But what would you like to see come out of this that maybe wasn't in place before the COVID crisis hit?
So, like I said before, we hit what I'd call the Star Wars. We did 3, 4, 4, 5, and 6 before we did 1, 2, and 3. So what it shows me is I have a great community that already understands it has a role and it feels empowered. What I need to do, and we've done that at the level of organisations, what we need to do is those 30,000 people that did get that support, how do we get them engaged in being the voice of tomorrow? How do we get them engaged to feel that, yes, we all have a role? Technically, I'm the leader of the council. No, I'm not. I'm the greatest facilitator of an organisation which is there to facilitate its community. All right. So it's how do we do that in a way that brings actually a lot more to the table than we ever could as a single entity organisation. And I'd say to you, that's our challenge now, is from a great start, how do we get it to the place where it should have started from? Because actually we'd already had those conversations. So it's just joining up what we did 10 plus years ago to what we've had to do now. And you know, it can only start from where the person is, where the citizen is, and we then collectively need to agree the aspiration we have for the place.
Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense. All right, brilliant. Thank you, Darren. So moving on to Sotez. So Sotez, I know that you've been involved in so many different community organising efforts around the country and some really inspiring actions also of late. Can you use your 8 minutes also to inspire us, give us a little bit of a flavour of the community organising approaches that you've been involved in and the difference that they've made maybe over the last few months? Over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Francis. I feel like I have been stitched up having to follow after Darren and his. I think first of all I have to pay tribute to Darren and all the folks that fought the BNP, and actually like the mark of that leading on to the work that the council's gone off to done is I think it's immeasurable. I mean, I grew up in Bethnal Green and the other end of the East End, so you got East Enders all across tonight as the audience for the audience. But right after that moment, what happened was there was a complete shift in terms of where people felt like they could and couldn't live, where they thought they could be a part of a community and where they couldn't. Because where we grew up, there's a double-edged sword to racism, right? Which is one is like worrying about being attacked as a person of color, and the other one is a person of color feeling like white people are all the same or a particular group of people are the same. And actually, if people didn't combine together, and lots of the people fighting the racists were not people of color, they were people from all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of ages, getting together and actually doing community organizing to politically knock out opponents. But that also suggested many other things that were much more important, which, now, like Barking and Dagenham is one of the most diverse and youngest places in the country, and that wouldn't have happened if that didn't happen first. So like, I pay tribute to that, and that was incredible. And I go to Barking a lot as a result. Got lots of friends there now. So there's that. And the other thing that I guess I'll caveat what I'm going to say with this is Darren gave an unusually good example of how a good council ought to be. That is definitely not the case for many people around the country, Labour or otherwise, right? And so essentially, I got politicised by two things. One was when I was in school, 9/11 happened, and I felt incredibly powerless. And the next time I felt incredibly powerless was when the economic crash happened about just over a decade ago, and I was doing my studies at university. And I guess the thing for me was going, I'm really angry, feel really powerless about these things that are essentially ruining lots of people's lives. Lots of other people seem angry, and some people got together in protests, whether it was Occupy or there was the, things that led on to it. I'm not saying it was that, but after 9/11, there were certain, attacks on particular minority communities, or it was like the war and subsequent things that had happened. And I felt like some of those things were making concessions, but a lot of those things were failing. And I guess I was somebody not interested in protest. I was interested in winning. Didn't really know how. And so I got I found this thing called community organising, and there's lots of books and lots of theory around it, but essentially it is tied into exactly what Francis was picking up on from what Darren was saying, which was it's about people and civil society and the role we can play regardless of who's in power. So, but by building people power. And I guess it's a term that's branded and used a lot, like it's thrown around a lot, but it's about both building people power, using it and locating where other power is. So without getting too academic on this, in short, it's how do we build power? And the argument here is through relationships. And I think the relational thing it's something that makes a lot of sense, but often we find doesn't happen in many places. Like we don't have relational cultures. So, if you turn up, people here could be from any political party, but I'll use examples of the Labour Party. First time I turned up, what would happen was somebody would give a speech, somebody else would give a speech, and they'll roll through minutes of the meeting. First talk about apologies, then talk about what happened in the last set of meetings and minutes, and then talk about this meeting, and then move on to arranging the date for the next meeting, which is all important and good, but like pretty boring. And often if you're a new person that turns up to this, you're like, my God, I probably don't want to turn up to this ever again. But some people enjoy it and stick it out, and good for them, and that's needed. But when you've got certain issues that you want to discuss, sometimes you're like, this space doesn't exist. The other thing that happens in these meetings is often people are often from this similar background or like have been part of it for a while, so people feel like they're not welcomed and included. And the third thing that happens is often you're asked, if you turn up as a brown person or a younger person or a person with a particular background, you get asked, do you want to be this officer or that officer or the secretary? You're like, my God, I went in for one thing, ended up with, now I'm the secretary of this COP. How the hell did that happen? And essentially that's because some of these spaces often aren't that creative about who's in the room and how you get the best out of them, how you get them to own that space without forcing them to do the thing you were forced to do, and that sometimes is saying, well, essentially it's don't abide by rules that don't exist. And just because you've got a Labour Party CLP or just because you attend the mosque doesn't mean you can't do other things instead of worship and running through Labour Party minutes and motions. And so community organising really fits in there by you create a relational culture where people get to know each other. You make sure that the business of the meeting and the agenda is people as well as the actual points and policies you were going to discuss. You really get to know people, where they're from, what talents they have, what interests they have. And just because it's not the same interest as yours, it's okay. Keep talking and eventually you'll find this common consensus on some things, not all. And that's really where you got to start, where where people have similar interests, because in political spaces, around campaign issues, what we naturally do is we go to debate mode. And I don't know about how many people here have been on debates, but probably plenty, right? And the thing about a debate is often nobody ends up winning. You might win the argument in the room, but no social change happens outside. So you might take a position on an international issue that's happening or a local issue, but because you've essentially used up all your energy fighting your opponent for that moment, you've not actually drawn that energy into doing something productive outside. And if you debate all the time against each other, you tire each other out, and then you often, you end up warding feelings against one another that might not be the most constructive place for going forward. And actually, if we look at the places where we can agree on, so like I'm essentially asking everyone to think like Marcus Rashford. He's just done something brilliant, right? He has not come out with a party political position. He has created an argument, but he's essentially brought more people on with him than the amount of people he's trying to fight. And what we've seen is he has organized on a massive scale tons of people who have now been inspired, because essentially the message is simple. It's not a really complicated argument. It's like, kids are hungry, here's an issue, and this is how we all need to challenge the government towards it. The government said no, but he was able to inspire lots of people in their creativity to find an alternative way to deal with that issue, which is feeding the kids. And people all around the country have jumped to that, because lots of people in the UK are good people and they want to do the right thing, irrespective of their political allegiances, or even if they're people who don't vote, they still believe in certain things and they will work towards them. He's shown people how, and then he's told stories. And there's the other key thing, we need to tell good stories of good ways of doing things that other people can replicate. And this is essentially what's happened. The other thing that you need to do is you need to narrow down, right? Before I was talking about locating power, you also need to locate an issue. You need to be very specific about the thing you want to work on. The problem in politics, and I used to teach in a university, and kind of like Darren, I like to think I'm kind of straight talking, but I used to end up with students who used to confuse the hell out of me, because I'd say something and they'd say all sorts of things as a follow-up question, and it used to make me feel like, oh my God, I don't feel like I should be here, I can't teach them. And actually what that was people weren't trying to find a common consensus, of trying to bring people together. It was kind of saying, this is my position, this is what you know, and I know more. But it brings me to my next point, which is the different thing I think that organising does is it really intentionally tries to develop people. I think working on issues is really important, but often you'll see in politics, there are some people that are being developed or developing themselves because they want to be a councillor, want to be an MP or something like that. And that's what happened when I first got interested. People were like, oh, why don't you be a councillor? I was like, I don't want to be a councillor. That can't be the solution to everything. Being a councillor is very important, but I didn't want to do that, nor did I want to be the CLB secretary. But what I would be interested in doing is building a bit of my confidence. We often go to the busiest person, give them lots to do, but also the person we perceive as the best person at public speaking, we go, oh, we've got this issue, can you speak about it? Can you almost advocate? We abdicate our responsibilities and our opportunities for growth, and we give it to the person who's already ready. Whereas organising, what it allows you to do is build relationships and develop yourself and learn about issues. And, you do it at your pace and whatever is relevant to your community. And you can scale it as much or as little as you want. So it could be something you literally do, on your street, which is you talk to a bunch of neighbours, you knock on their doors, you say hi, hello, and you get to know them, you get to know who they are, what their interests are, and you might pick up on a really simple issue, which might be, or it's not an issue, it might be an opportunity. It could be we don't usually get to meet our neighbours, why don't we do a street party? So that's a really simple thing. Other people pull together and go, right, food bank, lots of hungry kids or families, why don't we pull together and do that? And other people then organising. I used to work for an organisation called Sotez in the UK, much accredited for working on a particular campaign called the Living Wage campaign. And so the living wage is above the minimum wage. It's like calculated on what it would cost to live in an area, depending on the cost of like living, housing, etc., etc. But here's the interesting thing: that issue came from a set of unusual people who are not naturally people who sit down in a think tank and create policy. It was cleaners getting together after prayers at a mosque. It was people in schools who were like, we don't have enough to eat or go buy on. And those people basically put together, and we realized loads and loads of people cared about this, as well as other allies. So like the trade unions and other think tanks and politicians, and got together and built a lot of power. And now that campaign is all across the country and gets loads and loads and loads of businesses paying, which is the interesting thing. You would have naturally thought lots of people would say, oh, businesses wouldn't want to pay. But actually, when you talk to people, you realize there's lots of businesses that want to do the right thing. And then you don't just necessarily always have to act against them or lobby them. Sometimes you use their own arguments to get them to realize why it would be beneficial. So obviously somebody on a low wage who struggles to on the minimum wage would be like, right, if I got paid enough, that would be really good for me because I could spend more time with my kids and have some more money for whatever I need. But also to a business, you get to go, and wouldn't that be better for you if you had less training costs and less hiring costs and less recruitment costs, because your staff are valued at work and they don't feel like they have to leave for 50 pence extra to go to another job. So what you essentially end up doing is aligning, if you're organising through relationships, a set of interests together. And essentially within that, you've built a lot of power. Now, what I'm painting here slightly is a rosy world, but that same power could be used when you've got to get into tension, right? Whether that's, I work for the Labour Party, but I used to do organising with in Citizens UK with civil society groups, lots of churches, mosques, schools, community organisations, youth centres, and we would have to sometimes go and negotiate with, and we had an independent council in Tower Hamlets, we had a Labour council in Tower Hamlets, we still do, and we'd negotiate with both because you're always winning justice. And sometimes it's about convincing the person, and sometimes you've got to put some pressure on, but you've got that because you've built that, those sets of relationships with lots of people. And it is much harder to divide that group because often it is an unusual set of unlikely people where you've got that story, right? You've got when a Muslim, a Christian, an atheist, and a Jew walk into the council to negotiate with Darren, it's an unusual set of people that other people would naturally go, right, they're not going to work together. And they are, because there's this particular issue that they're working on. And there's like incredible power in that. And the leadership development you see of folks, for me, the most inspirational people used to be mums. Mums in schools used to know more about what's going on in the community, what are the different issues, who knows who, and you're like, they've done all the work for you. They've spent a lot of time there. We need to work with those people as well as the established civil society networks, as well as the people in power. And we've got to win things, and we've got to share those stories. And just on the last bit that I was going to say is, we're in a world where like very cruel and very beautiful things are happening at the same time. So like the pandemics happen, but then we've seen extraordinary efforts by humanity all across the world where incredible people have gone like incredible lengths to help others. And lots of people love the sort of rhetoric of, oh, lots of people are apathetic. If you look at the amount of people that sign petitions, if you look at the amount of people that are prepared to go and take action on Black Lives Matter or other things, if you look at the amount of people increasingly interested in joining political parties, which have grown massively, then you go, there's a lot of potential out there. So my last challenge on this is, what we can't just do is email them. We can't just email them and tell them to do actions. We need to meet as many of them as possible, because that's where the real power is. With that, I will pass it back over to Francis.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much, Sotez. And I think it was a really powerful point to end on, because as you were speaking there, I was just thinking about how the work that you do and the community organising approach tends to say, you know, have a plan and have a strategy, but also be willing to be flexible and adaptable and work with people, rather than saying, okay, you come along and just follow my lead, whether you're a party, whether you're an official, whether you're a politician, or even just a self-appointed sort of community leader that people look to. The idea that of community organising is saying, well, who's not being heard, and also who's got expertise and resources and wisdom that we're not hearing, who need to be part of this conversation and who are actually going to drive this forward. And I think that's a big part about this question of connecting the community, is actually we also see at the local level, there are people who see themselves as those leaders, and that's great. They're often the people, you know, I grew up in a small village in the north of England, and I could tell you probably on the fingers of one hand who you would go to get stuff done. You know, they were kind of the community gatekeepers, but they were doing a lot of really good stuff. But the question was, what about all of those other thousands of people who weren't being involved? And I think through this crisis, you've seen people stepping up and taking a lead because they were looking around and thinking, I've got to do something. And that feeling of feeling helpless, but also feeling energized because you could see the need, is something that's very powerful and is a huge motivator for people. So how do people continue to harness that energy and that sense of agency and confidence that actually other people aren't doing it? I've got to step up in sort of more normal times, so that we continue to offer that kind of solidarity to our neighbours and don't wait for other people to do it for us. I think that's a powerful message of community organising, really. So seamlessly, I'm going to move from that into the experience that I've had over the past few months and the organisation that I've been working with. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. This is where everyone has to cross their fingers and toes. This should be fine. Yeah, so what you're seeing right now is a picture of a place where until a couple of months ago, I used to live. So this is Pembroke House, and it's in Walworth, which is in South London, just off the Old Kent Road, and sandwiched between the Old Kent Road and Walworth Road, in a little neighbourhood we like to call the Walworth Triangle, to make it sound hipster and cool, because branding of everything. Burgess Park, which is my background, is just around the corner. And for the past couple of years, I've been a resident here at the community centre, which means essentially that next to the community centre, and attached to it, is a 6-bedroom house where a number of us have lived and shared our time and our resources, also with Pembroke House as an organisation. This place was founded 135 years ago in 1885, and it was founded by a group of social reformers, essentially. So around the turn of the century, there was a big movement of settlement houses all across the UK, and they spread also to North America and Europe and different parts of the world. And was essentially motivated by this idea that a lot of middle-class social reformers wanted to help the poor, but realised they didn't know anything about the lives of the poor. So they moved into this space in what was originally a slum in Walworth, and worked alongside their neighbours and said, okay, we're here as neighbours and as friends to offer some sort of concrete solidarity rather than from making policy from afar. The settlement movement spat out also many different famous social reformers, among them Clement Attlee, obviously, who went on to become Prime Minister, and the time he spent in numerous settlement houses, actually, he was involved with, he attributed to a big part of his politics was about that question of community organising, actually. How do we get to know our neighbours and friends, and how do we work with them to better our neighbourhood and to also introduce the kind of policies that we need? So I could talk for years and years about the settlement movement. It had its frictions and tensions. I mean, after all, there was a sort of a class difference between the people who were moving in the space, but the history is fascinating, and I really encourage you to all go off and find out more about it. But Pembroke House is one of the only surviving settlement houses which has the original elements, which are a space for worship, the settlement house, and a programme of social activities. We also have a very flourishing lunch club, or did up until this crisis. We also run a community cafe, and we have team dinners. So a lot of what we do is based around food, as well as offering sports, music, after-school clubs, and various other community activities. And as a resident, my job was to organise Pembroke House's events. So I was in the middle of preparing for our street party, which was the second this year, which was a big event, sort of 500 people. But of course, that got thrown, of course, by COVID. Instead, what we decided to do when COVID hit was rapidly transform our buildings into a food hub. We worked closely with the council similarly to how Darren was mentioning and Sotez was mentioning, people looked around at a time of crisis and said, what can we do? So we talked to the council, we talked to other neighbourhood organisations, we talked to civil society, schools, doctor surgeries, and we linked up a network such that people who were food insecure or needed some extra help in terms of getting food to them could ask for a food delivery package, and it would be delivered to them by riders, a team of a flotilla of volunteer riders who ran all over the neighbourhood on their bikes to drop food parcels and are still doing so. So actually this is leading on from a history for Pembroke House. During the Blitz, we were transformed into an emergency bomb shelter, and also during the Spanish flu epidemic and the cholera epidemics back in the early 1900s, we also offered space for people who were ailing and sick to come and spend time. So at times of emergency, community organisations like Pembroke House have often stepped up to offer their buildings as a space. So I'm going to show you a video in a second about what we've taken on over this crisis, but we were also really clear from the beginning that we wanted to offer this service in extraordinary times, but we thought that food insecurity is a scandal in ordinary times, and we also didn't want to paper over the cracks of what is essentially a massively unjust system. So the focus of the Food Hub activities has always been on how do we move beyond this crisis to tackle the root causes of food insecurity in Walworth. Questions about low pay, precarity of work, lack of access to food, lack of access to open space and green space as well, which is part of public health. And how we can come together as a neighbourhood to think up solutions to this, whether they be growing our own more vegetables in community gardens, whether it is to do with sharing foods more widely and doing food drops, having local pantries and community fridges. These are all ideas we're exploring. So right now our hub is still buzzing every day. 270 locals currently volunteer for us as food packers and delivery riders, and 350 have contributed since March. Our cyclists, and myself included, have pedalled through wind, rain, snow, and a very nice hot summer, over 50,000 kilometres, and we've delivered 140 tonnes of food. And over 50 partner organisations and businesses have contributed food, supplies, and helped us reach more than 1,000 people a week. But as I said, we're really crucial to this response has been this question of how we move on from here. And for that, we also wanted to involve the whole community. So I'm about to show you a video that we showed as part of our community event a few months ago, where we brought together everyone who'd been involved in the Food Hub, whether they were volunteers, food parcel recipients, local councillors, institutions, organisations, to say, how do we all work together and we all have a part to play? Because one of the founding principles of the settlement movement was this philosophy is we all have something to give and something to gain. So there's not this sort of hierarchy of people who are recipients and people who are givers, sort of the beneficent and the beneficiaries. It was really this question of everyone has something to give and something to gain through this. So how do we all think about what we put into this? So Grace, can you see my screen? Okay, I'm going to present.
Before COVID, we weren't a food hub. We ran the Walworth living room and
Let's try that again. Yep.
Before COVID, we weren't a food hub. We ran the Walworth living room and Pembroke House. For over 130 years, we've been working with the community, providing space for people to learn, eat, and enjoy life together. Our neighborhood has been through a lot over the years, from cholera to Spanish flu and the Blitz. Through these crises, we've always been proud of this neighborhood, how we've banded together to support one another. At the beginning of COVID, suddenly the number of people without access to food and basic goods exploded. So we transformed the building into a food hub and started delivering parcels to neighbors who needed them. We did this together with local businesses, organizations, and an army of volunteers. Since March, we've delivered more than 10,000 food parcels, and volunteers have cycled 35,000 kilometers, carrying more than 90 tons on their backs. In extraordinary times, our community rose to the challenge to support those in need. But the scandal is that 20% of residents in Walworth regularly missed meals before the crisis. So COVID has revealed a food crisis that was already there. The crisis has unearthed inequalities in our neighborhood that harm us all. These last few months, we've been at our best. Neighbors have met for the first time. New relationships have been formed and partnerships have gotten off the ground. There's lots that we can build on, but we can't go back to business as usual. So where do we go next? How can we build a neighborhood that works together to tackle the root causes of food insecurity, poverty, and inequality? No one organization can solve this problem. We have to confront it together. So we are starting a different type of conversation, a conversation about the future where everyone is invited. So whether you've been shielding or volunteering, furloughed or working harder than ever, come and tell us how you have been affected by COVID-19. We'll discuss how we can build a Wellworth where no one struggles for want for food. Instead, food can be celebrated, a reason to come together. This conversation is the start of that building process.
So I really wanted to show that just because it was what we showed at our community conversation, and that was really a chance for people to just join it as a deliberative exercise to come together to have these solutions. And this process is now ongoing. We've started a number of daisy chain conversations, which will link people up across the neighbourhood to have one conversation and then the next one with someone else. And at the end of that, we're hoping that also this comes up with some clear actions that the community wants to take together to tackle the cause of food insecurity. So that's my bit done with. At this point, we will now break into breakout groups, and you have the choice of 3 different breakout groups corresponding to the 3 different speakers. Some of you will be interested in what you'd be focusing, what we've been talking about with Sotez, what we've been talking about with Darren, and some of you will want to join the conversation around food insecurity with me. You will have had a chance already to indicate which breakout group you wanted, but if you, for whatever reason, changed your mind, or maybe you were in Hillary's group and have been reallocated, you do get a chance to stay in the main session. We'll be in these breakout groups for around 20 minutes, and you will also be able to move between them if you find yourself. See everybody coming back in and rejoining us. Thanks so much. I hope you all had fruitful discussions. I could see there was quite a lot of people writing in the document and people just jotting down notes here and everywhere, which is great. Yes.
So could I quickly just, we got really into introducing ourselves because I was overindulging in it, and we got like incredible people, just apologizing to those people we couldn't get through. And we basically completely disregarded the questions you asked us.
That's totally fine.
Because as organizers, we disrupt, right? That's what we were like, here's the meeting agenda.
So we did half an intro round and then forgot the rest of the exercise. But you know what? There's always one group.
Yeah, we were the naughty group, jointly led by us. We all jointly did the rebellion. But like genuinely, it was incredible to find so many people from such interesting backgrounds from all across the country working on incredible things. And the reason we went around and just heard that is because the potential even here just to connect up is just, interesting. And the amount of people that were talking about similar things or caring about environmental issues and being conscious was just fantastic. Sorry, I just wanted to
No, that's exactly what the groups were meant to do, really. The questions are a little bit of a hook, and hopefully we glean something from them. But actually, similarly in my group, there's people all around the country doing this, and we were just really exclaiming about the number of different projects we all come across that we think, oh, maybe I'm just doing it in my local area, and then you hear about 10 other places doing it. So this was kind of the point of it, and this is what also we hope that Compass can do, is connect people up in different places in the country. More than ever before, people can just jump on a Zoom call and connect with other people who are doing things and share practical tips and tricks. So that's definitely been part of what we're trying to do with these sessions. So just to close, I would like to say several things. So firstly, was a huge thank you to our speakers, Darren and Sotez, and to all of you for showing up tonight and coming along and participating in these discussions and sharing also your stories and ideas. As I say, just so energizing for all of us at a time when we might feel also quite disconnected from people, to hear from different parts of the country how everybody's sort of stepping up to these challenges and thinking about the long term and the latent problems as well as just the immediate and the urgent. So a huge thank you to Darren Rodwell and Sotez Chowdhury, who will hopefully really stay connected also with everything that we do. Just a few things to say. So finally, this is part of a program of events, as I'm sure you're very sick of hearing the phrase Build Back Better, which is being spouted by everyone from Joe Biden to Boris Johnson and now us, but we're sticking with it because we claim that we got there quite early. So we're just pushing this event through our Build Back Better How series of events. As I say, we've got two more events now. So one is tomorrow lunchtime. So if you're lucky enough to have a lunchtime slot where you can move out of your Zoom work meeting onto a Zoom Compass meeting, you can join us to talk about democracy and deliberation. We'll be hearing from a really fantastic panel of speakers and also live basically from the Climate Assembly UK. So obviously they've had the Climate Assembly and they've come out with the recommendations, and we'll be hearing about that process, what's happening next, and also about the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill, and from Stuart White about the questions around the Democratic and Constitutional Convention. So we'll be talking a lot of everything democracy tomorrow lunchtime, and that's at 12:30. And then on Saturday at 2, we've got a kind of bumper edition around leadership. We've got 4 leaders of various kinds and speakers, and they'll be talking about the challenges to leadership in the current time, how we might be rethinking leadership and what good leadership looks like. So leadership, how, everything to do with that is on Saturday at 2. And just a little plug to we've got a final event next week, which is not really part of the Build Back Better series, but obviously we've got the US election coming up next week, and we've got a very special podcast on Thursday the 5th, which is going to be talking to people about how 3 Americans who are doing a lot of work on the ground about talking to people across divides, and we're going to be talking to them about what it means to have dialogue in current times in US politics. So just giving a little plug for that. Finally, just to say, please do chip in if you can afford to do so. Just throw some money in the pot on your way out, as it were. We've got little buckets at the door, / we also have a link that Grace can share. And if you have been inspired by the event tonight and want to join our membership, our growing membership, people of members all across the country, please do sign up as a Compass member, and you can participate in our local groups, many of whom are doing the sorts of things we've been discussing tonight about connecting up the community and bringing together people at these strange but also hopeful and very industrious times, as we've been hearing, people getting involved in things all across the country, and we've got some new groups which have just started out as well. So thank you very much for sticking with us all the way through. Please do go away and have your tea. And a huge thanks once again to our speakers and to everyone for joining us tonight. That's a wrap. And thanks very much for joining us.